On today's show, the bullet point, our top 4 topics in the areas of news, technology, politics, and entertainment. Choose the one you want to hear the most by visiting our Mastodon page at mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed. Choose one out of the 4 and I'll read it for you live. Then, breaking news in the areas of politics, national and international stories, live on air as it happens. Plus, the most interesting articles I can find from the Washington Post, CNBC, Variety, Business Insider, The Hollywood Reporter, and more. Then, a moment of Krug, a Paul Krugman op-ed that is a must-read. All of that and what you may have missed in the news today. Stay tuned. Welcome to today's show. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small, and I'm confessing at the top that I'm having a couple of technical difficulties. So if you see me turning that way, that's the reason why. I have to actually take a look at my screen because my Stream Deck isn't actually functioning correctly. So, but I don't want to waste a whole lot of time discussing that kind of stuff. I want to get right into it. So I just want to, there are going to be 3 stories I want to focus on today. 3 stories that caught my eye, and I think they're important to discuss because it really sort of changes, it deals with issues that are important to me and that I think are absolutely fascinating to see how these things turn out. So let's get into it. And I've actually had last week off, and I almost have seemed to have forgotten how to use my system here. So I'm going to move over here and take a look at this. Let me get right here to it. Let's see here now. All right. So today is Monday, April 1st, 2024. This show streams live on YouTube and on stream.vtip.me at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's right now. So on today's show, we are going to be discussing these 3 topics. First is Tennessee's rollback of police reform in the wake of the death of Tyree Nichols. The second is the Cherokee Nation, that they have asked for the federal government to step in and to address an issue with respect to black tribal citizens. People may not know this. I didn't know this, but Cherokee Indians and other, I should say, Native Americans in America had slaves. And when slavery ended, those slaves that were part of Native tribes became, or were supposed to become, a part of the tribe, become full members of the tribe. Some of these nations, even as of right now, support that these, former slaves or descendants of slaves that these nations took in as becoming full-fledged members. Others are against it, and that's going to be a part of this story as well. And then finally, I touched on this about 2 weeks ago, and this was a story about Oregon and its rollback of a lot of reforms, drug reforms. And it got a lot of, I think, press amongst the right because, and I discussed it because I thought it was an important topic, because part of what's happening, and actually let me go full screen here. I don't know why I'm in a box here when I should be full screen. All right, so the systems are not working as I thought they would. Part of the reason why is because these are very progressive moves. The attempt to do something about the problems with drugs, those are progressive ideas and progressive programs to take on drug reform and that kind of stuff. And I want to be, I don't want to say I want to be balanced so much so that I want to stress the importance of being able to make mistakes and being able to course correct. And we know the right doesn't do that, right? When the right begins to lose elections, when the right begins to be out of favor with the people, they change the laws. They don't change their behavior. They change the laws to make it more difficult to vote. Democrats should not do that. And I think what we're seeing, amongst Democrats is that they are willing to look at the laws and see where they've failed and make corrections to those, roll back, in other words, changes in order to address these issues. And you may move too quick, too fast. It may work in other countries and not work here. There are a whole host of different reasons why you would want to make reforms that you support, but think that we need to take a step back and make changes. And I want to talk about Portland, but what's going on here when was going on and is also going on in California as well with Proposition. I think it was ENF that I talked about last time. So let me get into this and sort of talk about this story, and I really want to explore this as much as I can. But let's first begin with the Tennessee rollback of police reform. And this story really, I don't know, it kind of really disappointed me. Let's just say that. And I have a clip in this video about the issue with Tyree Nichols. There's so much that is going on with regard to police brutality and all that kind of stuff that sometimes it gets lost in the weeds. It's important to remember what happened here, what happened in Tennessee. These were, by the way, black cops, and I'm going to show a video from this. And if it gets pulled from YouTube, gets blocked, please know you can go to stream.vtip.me and see the full video, which I'll have posted there. But I'm going to show a clip from the local news reform talking about at the time. I know I'd actually forgotten there's so much of this stuff that's been going on. But this was a case where a special squad of black police officers pulled this young black man over and basically killed him and tried to cover it up. So a bunch of police reforms came out of that to rein in the police. And in Tennessee, and they have the governor recently, I guess, felt that, and the legislature felt like, they didn't need these stinking laws. Remember, and this is the other thing that I have to stress. And again, I'm looking over to the side because my system isn't functioning here. I don't know why. Of course, it always happens just before I start a show. But remember, part of the conservative movement against federal action on a lot of cases, voting rights, all of it, has been this idea that the government closest to the people governs best. I think Jefferson, that's a quote from Jefferson. But we know that that's a lie and that's a scam. And what they want, of course, is for them, the state government, to rule over people, right? They don't want the local governments to do this. And the fact that the state legislature came in and changed this law, a law that I think was pushed through the local, and I'll go into the story. I think it explains how this law came about, but that tried to address something locally. The state came in and overrode the local mayors and city councils and all that kind of stuff, right? So this idea, they're the closest to the people, right? Your mayor, your city governments, your local members. I don't know in Tennessee what they have, but of all the different parts of the local government and whatnot, those are the closest to the people, right? So if you really believe that the government closest to the people governs best, then on a state level, you should allow these reforms to happen. You should allow the state, the city and local governments govern over the people, and you should have a hands-off approach on the state level. But we know that red states, conservative states that have pockets of blue or of democratic or of liberal local governments, that they come in and they override what they've done. Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, just go through every single conservative state. You will see that their actions put to lie this notion that the government closest to the people, closest best, works best. But they firmly believe it when it comes to the federal government overriding the state governor and state legislature, right? All of a sudden, they have a different view on that. So, but let me go into this because it's an interesting story. So, this is from WPLN online, and WPLN is a local affiliate. I can't remember which it is, affiliate of which station, but it goes, and this was from March 28th. Mariana Bacalao. And it says, police reform passed in the wake of Tyree Nichols' death at the hands of Memphis police is now null and void. Republican Governor Bill Lee signed into law a measure last week Thursday, that prevents local governments from passing anything that would interfere with police stopping crime. The governor's office did not immediately respond to WPLN's request for comment. So, again, this is the state overriding local government. So, the notion of, and this again is a conservative mantra, that the government closest to the people governs best is a lie when it comes to Tennessee. And I would say when it comes to all conservatives, it's another example of a lie. This is why, again, a liar like Donald Trump could come in and take over the Republican Party. Why? Because they're used to lies. They're used to being told one thing and behaving in a completely different way. So when a Donald Trump comes into the party and he begins to act and behave a way different that is inconsistent with what he is saying, it's totally not something that the state or that Republicans or that conservatives find odd, because this happens all the time. This is how they run government. They lie all the time. They say one thing and do the opposite all the time. And I believe the Republican Party in general, the conservative movement specifically, does this, and the Republican people, they just have gotten used to it. So they don't even see the hypocrisy in their own beliefs not being enacted. So go on to say, in the wake of Nichols' death, the Memphis City Council, that's the local government, Memphis is a city in Tennessee, that's the local government, the local city council passed several ordinances aimed at reforming its police department. The Tyree Nichols Act eliminated pretextual traffic stops when an officer pulls someone over for a minor violation like a broken taillight or expired tags. This is a quote now, when they stopped our son Tyree, they came up with all these different excuses as to why they stopped him. But we all know none of those excuses panned out. Rowan Vaughn Wells said, this is Tyree Nichols' mother. Ralph Vaughn and Rodney Wells traveled to Nashville earlier this month to urge lawmakers to vote against the measure that would undo police reform named for their late son. Nichols' parents weren't in the room when the Tennessee House advanced the law. The family said that's because the bill's sponsor, Republican John Gillespie of Memphis, told them the bill was being pushed to the following week. So basically his word is no good to us. On the House floor, Democrat Rep. Justin J. Pearson, also of Memphis, spoke against the bill and its timing. So if people don't know, this guy, Mr. Pearson, has become a very popular man on the left because he has been one of these folks who have spoken out about what Tennessee is doing, their legislature is doing to the local government. And they tried to expel him, and the people brought him back, and I mean, it's a mess. It's a whole deal with Tennessee. But I want to play this clip. This is in YouTube, and this is from the ABC local affiliate about, and this is back when Tyree Nichols was killed, just so that people remember what happened and what this is all about. Let me play this, if it will play. Or if I can get this.
Well, we start tonight with breaking news. The city of Memphis releasing 43 videos and more than 20 hours of new footage of Tyree Nichols' deadly encounter with former members of the Memphis Police Department's Scorpion Unit. Thanks for joining us at 6. I'm Richard Ransom.
And I'm Pepper Baker. Now, while the new footage shines a little more light on what happened 1 year ago, it also raises more questions about this monumental case.
We'll get analysis from experts here in the studio with us shortly, but first, ABC 24's Stephen Pimpo breaks down what he discovered today. Stephen?
Richard, Pepper, one of the main themes we continue to come up against while reviewing this footage revolves around the ex-Memphis police officers involved in Tyree Nichols' death contradicting each other on camera, especially when it comes to why they pulled him over and the degree to which Nichols allegedly resisted arrest.
He started fighting with us and took off, and he got pepper sprayed and took off running. They did catch him.
My
Yes,
son,
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Not Tyree.
This interaction between Tyree Nichols' mother, Rovon Wells, and former Memphis police officer Preston Hemphill is just some of the newly released footage from the night of her son's death after a traffic stop by the now disbanded MPD Scorpion Unit. MPD has said Nichols was initially pulled over for reckless driving. But here's what new body camera footage shows.
What was the original stop for? PC, then evading
Well, you can't do what unit transported that stabbed victim in?
because then that means it was pursuit.
Former officer Demetrius Haley had a different answer.
Yeah, he was drove into oncoming traffic. So we tried to, I'm talking about, he literally, yes, all into traffic. I'm talking, so we tried to get him stopped.
This is one of the calls into dispatch from officers pursuing Nichols.
Okay, you have any charges on him?
There's no answer. Haley also claims Nichols tried to attack him and tried to grab another officer's gun.
Took a swing, grabbed Martin, tried to grab Martin's gun. He had a whole grip on him. I'm talking about he grabbed him, still like this.
But this is how Officer Hemphill described his interaction with Nichols.
Dude was very polite while resisting. I'll give him credit.
What was he saying?
We were telling him, get on the ground. Okay, officers, I'm getting on the ground. Okay, officers, whatever you say, and not doing. He was politely resisting.
But it still cost Nichols his life. Now, the only reason this latest Tyree Nichols-related video was released is because a media coalition sued for its release last March, granting public access to the court's gag order in the criminal case against the 5 now former MPD officers. This new video comes out 1 year and 3 days after the city released the initial video footage. Richard Pepper.
So, just to be clear, this is a report from I think last year. This is a year-old report. I will provide links in Mastodon. That's mastodon.vtip.me/at what you missed. And it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace for a number of reasons. It's a disgrace for one reason, that these are all black cops that are laughing about. Basically, they murdered this young man, right? They can't even get their stories straight. And if you had people who were looking for police to serve the people, right? Police are agents of the people. They are basically the government, right? And you have, again, this hypocrisy amongst conservatives about government abuse and government overreach. Police are agents of the government, and they have to abide by the law, just like everybody else. And these cops basically pulled him over and decided to beat the crap up. My father's a former police officer, people may know. He used to tell us that cops hate to have to chase somebody down. It pisses them off. And I don't know that much about the chase to try and get him to pull over. But cops, and particularly the Scorpion unit, apparently was known for brutalizing people. And part of what you have, again, this is a blue, Memphis is pretty much a blue part of a red state. And anytime you have a blue county or city in a red state, the red state, in other words, the governor and the legislature, they come in hard and fast. They do not believe that the government governs best when it comes to blue states. They believe when it comes to red states, and it's the federal government, they believe that the state government would be better to handle them. But when it comes to blue counties in a red state, all of a sudden, all of that goes out the window. Again, it's a scam. It's a con, right? That's why Donald Trump fits so well within the Republican Party, within the conservative movement, because they're used to this. So let me get back to the story. Because this is all under the guise of trying to stop crime, right? Crime is so rampant. They want to stop it, even if it means that you have to kill a couple of people. You have to commit crimes to stop crimes. It's worth it. So moving on, it says Gillespie denied Pierce's claim. He said that the measure will keep Tennessee communities safe. And he says, quote, I have constituents, I have neighbors, and I have members of the community that are begging for safer streets, and this will do exactly that. Now, mind you, he is responding to the fact that the family of Tyree Nichols lied to them about when this was going to be brought up because they wanted to be there when this was voted on. And he lied to them and said, oh, yeah, we're going to bring this up a week from now or next week. And in fact, they brought it up that same day after the family left. They brought it up the same day. So again, the similarities, it's really important because people are wondering, and I hear people wonder, and all of this stuff about Donald Trump and the conservative movement, the Republican Party. Donald Trump fits in well with the Republican Party of today. He lies, they lie. And that is why Donald Trump has basically taken over the Republican Party, because the party is at a point where their ideology has become so toxic to the American people that they cannot tell the truth, right? And this is supposed to be a party of Christians. This is the other thing, the other irony. This is supposed to be a party of Christians, and yet they lie all the time. And this is just one example in Tennessee of a legislator lying to their own constituency, right? This person may not be a rep from their area, but they represent the entire state. And they lied to the family of Tyree Nichols because they're cowards. And at the end of the day, they know that if they didn't lie, that what they were about to push through was not going to be popular. It wasn't going to be something that they would want to support. So they lied to them. And this is why Donald Trump, the liar in chief, they have embraced him because they see his lies like their own, a means to an end. So, continuing on, it says after the bill passed out of the Senate, Democrat Senator London Lamar told reporters that the legislator had sent a message that they condone police brutality. Of course they do. As for the Nichols family, Rowan Vaughn Wells says that this legislation undoes the legacy of her son and puts Black Memphis at risk. Quote, our son got pulled over for a pretextual stop and he ended up murdered. So you tell us, should we continue to keep having these pretextual stops? Because at the end of the day, my stop and your stop are two different stops, she said. The measure becomes law as the Memphis Police Department is already under federal civil rights investigation for Tyree Nichols' death. By the way, you can expect that if Donald Trump becomes president, that investigation is going to go away. That federal civil rights investigation is going to disappear. Just like when I can't even remember the senator who became Attorney General, terrible. All of a sudden started undoing all of the work that was done to deal with issues of race in local cities, red counties that were under investigation for civil rights violations. He came in and undid those. But make no mistake, this is what the Republican Party is about. This is how they feel. And you know, pretextual stops, how is that constitutional? I mean, this should be sent up to the Supreme Court, to be honest with you, because a pretextual stop has got to be against the Constitution, right to search and seizure, illegal search and seizure. I mean, you can't pull people over for no apparent reason. And, you know, that happened in New York with stop and frisk, where people, cops would just stop people on the street and start frisking them, start patting them down. The constitutionality of that is fraught. And maybe in this conservative court, they'll get by it, but no way in a million years that this is the spirit of the Constitution at work. So, moving on. Cherokee Nation wants federal law to fix the Black tribal citizens. Now, this is something that I did not realize, and maybe other people did, but as I said earlier at the top of the show, that there are a number of African Americans, blacks, who were slaves. Their ancestors were slaves, and I did not realize that indigenous tribes had slaves. And when slavery ended, those members were able to stay with the indigenous communities that they were a part of, and they became citizens. But apparently there is something in the law that doesn't give them full quote unquote birthright, or I think they use the term blood right. I'm going to get into that in a minute. Citizenship of that nation. Why is that important? and this article talks about it. Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court has joined with liberals back when it was a much narrower court to uphold treaties that a bunch of these indigenous communities have made with the federal government, which a lot of these places like Oklahoma have just ignored. So they have for years had these treaties on the book that the state governments just completely ignore as if they don't exist. And Neil Gorsuch, I think about 3 years ago, who has always been an ally of the different indigenous nations, tribal nations, has said, look, the government made an agreement with this over 100 years ago, and we have to honor these agreements. And that put, by the way, Oklahoma, I think a couple of years ago, I cannot remember fully. Actually, I'll get into it. But that put Oklahoma on notice that they could no longer violate the agreements that were made between the federal government and these nations. And part of that agreement was over prosecutions. So if a crime is committed on tribal land, a tribal court handles it, and you get imprisoned through a tribal court, not state court. And the state of like Oklahoma and the rest of these places, Missouri, I think would be another one, have been fighting and took it all the way to the Supreme Court to overrule these tribal nations' own laws. And Gorsuch, along with the liberals at the time, sided with the tribal nations. So that's significant, right? Because that means that the laws on tribal lands, through their own means of meting out justice and meting out their laws, are handled on their land. And the government, the state government, cannot come in and interfere with that. Only federally could you do that, but the state government cannot come in and interfere with that. And again, as I just explained in the previous segment with respect to Tennessee, these state governments do not respect the laws of the local laws that they claim that they believe in. But in Oklahoma, they're being forced to by the Supreme Court. So this now, since that has happened, and since there is this protection, the Cherokee Nations now want to fix a loophole. And let's go into that right now. And this is by the way, Russell Contreras. And this is from Axios Online. This is yesterday, March 31st, 2024. And it says, one of the nation's largest indigenous tribes is seeking to change a 140-year-old federal law that governs criminal jurisdiction of tribal citizens on reservations based on blood quantum. The move by the Cherokee Nation comes as the Oklahoma tribe is welcoming the descendants of formerly enslaved people once owned by tribal members as citizens. Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. tells Axios the tribe is asking Congress to revamp the 1885 federal law that focuses on Indian blood, quote unquote, a racial category many tribes now shun. Federal courts have interpreted that law to require tribal citizens charged in criminal cases on tribal land to have a certain blood quantum to be prosecuted in federal or tribal court instead of state. Hoskins says that the law discriminates Cherokee citizens of freedmen descendants who may be tried in state court with other non-tribal members, and it needs to be updated for a new reality. Quote, it's about the United States respecting the tribal sovereignty and, frankly, catching up with the Cherokee Nation in terms of equality for all our citizens, including Cherokee citizens of freedmen descendants. Freedmen meaning slaves, former slaves, freed. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2020 that a larger portion of eastern Oklahoma falls within an indigenous reservation, preventing state authorities from prosecuting offenses committed by Native Americans on tribal land. That is the case that I just referred to, where Neil Gorsuch sided with the liberals on that. And Oklahoma went back to court after, because at that time, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still alive and on the court. She has since died in the court, changed its composition, and since that happened, Oklahoma went back to court to try and get the Supreme Court to undo what it had just done the year before, because the makeup of the court changed. You know, this is how we play the game now. So, but apparently a lot of that law was still upheld. But so Oklahoma is pissed, by the way. The Republicans in Oklahoma are pissed because large portions, as this says, larger portions of eastern Oklahoma falls with indigenous reservation, meaning the government, the state government and local government, I would imagine, have no jurisdiction. Well, they are the local government. So the state government has no jurisdiction over prosecuting crimes. So the Tyree Nichols situation, if you had, for instance, cops pulling over an indigenous man in Oklahoma, you know, they'll tell Bill Lee to go kiss his butt because they cannot, who I believe is the, no, I think Bill Lee is Bill Lee? I have to take a look. But whoever the governor is of Tennessee, they can pass all the laws that they want, but it would not, if this were happening on indigenous land, those police officers, the state legislature, all of that would not have any bearing on the laws of the tribes. So it goes on to say, so the Supreme Court ruled in 2020 that large portions of Oklahoma, a red state, fall within indigenous reservations. But some black tribal members are still being prosecuted because they lack, quote, Indian blood, according to the New York Times. The Times highlighted a case involving Michael J. Hill, a black citizen of the Cherokee Nation who got into an altercation with police on tribal land. What did I just say? That is basically a Tyree Nichols situation in Oklahoma. He sought to have a case dismissed, arguing that as a tribal member in tribal territory, state officials were outside of the state's criminal jurisdiction, but courts ruled he did not have enough quote-unquote Indian blood to make the claim. The Cherokee Nation Supreme Court ruled in 2021 that freedmen have the right to tribal citizenship, and the tribe soon approved changes to its constitution to include freedmen. The Cherokee Nation has around 15,000 enrolled citizens of freedmen descendant. Other tribes who once owned blacks enslaved people are resisting to include freedmen as tribal members. Black descendants of enslaved people once owned by members of the Muskogee Nation are seeking full tribal membership in a case that's now backlogged in the tribe's court system. Hoskins says that the Cherokee Nation and other tribes will step up their lobbying efforts in Congress to make the changes to federal law. He said that the tribe is also considering legal challenges through the federal court system. So this is an example of a situation in which the U.S. government, the federal government, is being called to task on its relationship between the tribes, the state government, and its people. This is a legacy of slavery. This goes to the legacy of African Americans, of tribal people, and of what treaties mean. And it is unfortunate, but I think this is a case where, unfortunately, the Congress is so broken that I don't think they'll get anywhere as long as we have Republicans taking control of both the House and the Senate. So good luck trying to push that through. But it is another example of state trying to, again, this happens, I want to say almost exclusively, but I don't know if I can make that claim. But we know that when it comes to federal government, how conservative, how Republicans feel about when the federal government comes in and overrides and overrules the laws of the state. They make this claim that the local governments, the ones closest to the people, should make the laws and should govern the people, right? That's how they feel about the federal government. On the state level, they completely do a 180. They reverse themselves. So this is just another example, just as Tyree Nichols was another example. Oklahoma has been fighting against having the indigenous tribes be able to rule themselves. And if it were not for Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, the Oklahoma government would have dismantled upstanding treaty that has been on the books for, what is that, 140 years? They would have completely dismantled that treaty that was made between the United States government and tribal lands in order to allow these right wingers to continue to dominate the indigenous people in their government. So good for them. I hope that they succeed. So this last story is a follow-up from my story a couple of weeks ago or so. This was during Super Tuesday. And during Super Tuesday, one of the things that was happening is not only were people up for election, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but also a number of propositions and laws were being placed on the books. And during this election time in California, and this article goes into it, and more importantly in Oregon, which I highlighted, they were starting to do a shift away from their attempts to deregulate the drug, the laws around drugs in their state. And let's be clear, conservatives even now realize the war on drugs was a mistake or was a failure. I, of course, believe that one of the reasons why they've had a change of tune is because meth and other drugs that had been, that were not around but are now around, and they are predominantly, or maybe not predominantly, might not be the right word, but they are beginning to, or more often in redder areas, in more rural parts of the state, in parts of the state that are not big cities but are the suburbs, are being ravaged by meth. Was the big one. Fentanyl now is the newest one. And what's happening is that now that we're not just incarcerating black folks, now that we're not just incarcerating folks in the city, now you're having to go after, white, middle class, somewhat upper class folks. People are beginning to think that these laws are not that great. Surprise, surprise. And one of the things that's also happening is our jails are becoming overrun. People are not changing, right? The idea of penalizing people for being drug addicts is not working, has never worked. And instead, what you're doing, the federal government is doing, state and federal government is doing, is spending enormous amounts of money to house people as criminals. Same thing is going on, by the way, with homelessness. In Florida, governor recently passed a law, signed into law, a ban on being homeless. I mean, can you imagine something so ridiculous? Banning people from being homeless. So now what you're going to do is throw those people in jail, and now you're going to provide a home. So the state government is going to become the largest housing of people in the whole state. And it's so stupid that people don't seem to realize that you can't criminalize people for being homeless. I mean, the punishment is to put them in a home. Sure, it's going to be a jail cell, but I mean, it doesn't solve the problem. Anyway, getting back to Portland. So the answer to the problem with drugs was to finally start to rethink this whole situation. And the Ronald Reagan, just say no to drugs, the Ronald Reagan, just let's throw them in jail, let's penalize them by throwing them in jail, that will get them to stop taking drugs. Well, that didn't work. 30 years later, we realized, you know what, turns out it doesn't work. So you had this big push to decriminalize drugs. And as I talked about a couple of weeks ago in Oregon, they had one of the biggest deregulation moves. Well, maybe it moved too quick, too fast, because people were literally not getting treatment, that they were dying in the streets. They were ODing on fentanyl. They were not seeking treatment, which they had hoped by decriminalizing things, they would take the stigma, the shame away from people trying to seek treatment. But that didn't work. And what you do when something doesn't work is you roll it back, you do an analysis, and then you move forward. Like I said at the top of the show, Republicans, they make it more difficult to vote when people don't like the laws. Democrats, if they're smart, progressives, if they're smart, they look at why it didn't work and they make fixes and roll back the laws as they did. So, 2 weeks ago or so, they did just that. But the title of this is Why Portland Failed, where Portugal succeeded in decriminalizing drugs. And one of the reasons why I want to talk about this is this is a fascinating story, and it's something that we can learn from. Particularly if you are a progressive, you can learn from this on how to look at what didn't work and make adjustments. Something that conservatives do not do. But it says America's first experiment in treating hard drugs as a public health problem rather than one for police looks like it's about to end. And this is from, by the way, Politico. Carmen Pon and Etior Morales. I don't know how to say the name, but this was from yesterday, I believe. I don't have the date on here. I'll have to find out for sure. Links, of course, will be in Mastodon. The Oregon legislature has voted to repeal the state's 3-year-old law decriminalizing drug possession for personal use this month, joining cities from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. that are adopting new tough on drugs policy. Democrat Governor Tina Kotek is expected to sign the bill passed after a surge in fatal overdoses and public drug use in the coming days. But public health advocates behind the law say that the repeal is coming before decriminalization had a chance to work. They point to Portugal, which saw a 75% drop in drug deaths since it adopted the same strategy in 2001 through 2022, as evidence that Oregon is giving up too quickly. Portugal's success, they point out, wasn't achieved overnight or even in 3 years. Oregon's experiment was not given the time it needed, said Tara Hurst, the executive director of Oregon's Health Justice Advocacy Alliance. This is a political response to a serious problem, she said, of the measure's likely repeal. This is life and death. In response to sky-high overdose rates in the late 1990s, Portugal's parliament decriminalized drugs in 2000 and reoriented the country's response to the opioid crisis by reframing it as a public health and not a crime crisis starting in 2001. Oregon's lawmakers voted to once again impose criminal sentences for drug possessions because of a surge in fatal overdoses in drug use, public drug use. But Hurst and other decriminalization advocates said the law didn't succeed because of problems with implementation, a failure to fund new treatment services for 18 months after the law passed, a failure to train police on their new role in addressing addiction, and a failure to direct drug users to treatment. Proponents of the repeal, which will allow police to arrest people for drug possession while offering options to avoid jail by seeking treatment, said they aren't abandoning a public health-led approach. Rather, they said they are pursuing the needed fixes. Again, I just wanted to reiterate that these are, when I'm reading here, are snippets from, although this is pretty much the full article, but I try not to read the entire article. These are snippets. The full links to these articles will be in mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed. So, moving on. It was Oregon voters who decided to decriminalize drugs when they passed Measure 110 in a decisive 58 to 42% vote in November 2020. At first glance, the decision now looks spectacularly bad. Drug overdose deaths spiked almost 50% from 1,171 in 2021, when possession of drugs for personal use was decriminalized, to 1,683 in October 2023, according to the latest data available from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Opioids, particularly fentanyl, caused most of the deaths, according to Oregon Health Authority. The number of homeless people in Portland, the state's largest city, also rose to nearly 6,300 in 2023, a 65% hike since 2015. And public drug use grew rampant in the city, leading state and local leaders to declare a 90-day fentanyl emergency in January. Quote, fentanyl wreaks havoc on the people in its grips, often rendering them lifeless on our sidewalks, says Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler told reporters when he announced the emergency in January 30th. The new legislation aims to make Portland safer by cracking down on public drug use and giving police more power to respond when investing in while investing in improving treatment for substance use disorder. But decriminalization advocates said the ballot measure is unfairly blamed for rising drug use and homelessness. The spike in overdose deaths and public drug use were, in their view, caused by an unaffordable housing market exacerbated by the pandemic and the arrival of illicit fentanyl on the West Coast in 2020, years after it had hit other parts of the country. The ballot measure aimed to improve care for people suffering from addiction by allocating some $150 million a year from the state's cannabis tax revenue to improve and expand treatment access. Oregon ranked last in the nation in its capacity to provide addiction treatment when it decriminalized drug possession. The rise in overdose deaths is consistent with national and regional trends, according to data from RTI International, a research institute. Deaths from overdose spiked nationwide during the pandemic, reaching the record level of nearly 110,000 in a year for the first time. The deaths in Washington state rose more than Oregon since 2019, even though hard drug possession is still a crime there, according to RTI International's Alex Carl, an epidemiologist with expertise in drug policy. One of the things that people miss in the conversation is the context in which this intervention is being played. It's not like the state was doing great and the state got worse. The state had nothing. By contrast, Portugal had an expansive and trusted public health network that was reinforced by adding addiction treatment clinics during the 1990s. Portugal's decriminalization effort went into effect in the summer of 2001. Gaul believes it was effective in moving drug users into treatment from the start while reducing overdoses, but he said it took 3 to 4 years to prove it was. For you to be able to claim something works scientifically, you have to let it exist. You have to collect data, have it contrasted. These things take time. Under the decriminalization law, Oregon police issued $100 tickets to people caught using drugs, waivable if the person called a hotline to get treatment. The Oregon Secretary of State reported in December that the hotline received only about 10 calls a month and that staffing the line was costing $7,000 a call. Lawmakers who led the decriminalization legislation said they're adding a big stick to encourage drug users to get treatment, the threat of up to 6 months in prison, but that they're not giving up on the treatment first approach. If Kotek signs the bill, people arrested for drug possession can avoid jail if they agree to treatment. That will bring Oregon closer to Portland's system, advocates of recriminalization bill said. Portland doesn't put drug users in jail. Instead, police officers are used to encourage them into treatment by dissuading public consumption, and issuing tickets to those who are found to be doing so. In Oregon, Measure 110 has funded similar outreach projects, which can continue under the new bill. Max Williams, a former state lawmaker who also ran Oregon's prison system, said that the legislation would also put hundreds of millions of dollars into building treatment facilities that the state needs to respond to the demand for care. Quote, despite our rollback of this issue, Oregon has the most progressive drug laws of any state in the United States, he said. That's not the lesson the rest of America will take from what's happened in Oregon, though, other critics of decriminalization said. Oregon Senator Tim Knopp, the Republican minority leader, called the idea underlining the decriminalization movement that people will seek treatment on their own a fantasy, and rejected the argument that The policy needed more time to show results. The only thing that was happening with more time is our overdose deaths were on a skyrocketing trajectory. Not advice to other jurisdictions: get tough on drugs while building treatment infrastructure. Democrats increasingly see things similarly. Tough on drug policies are taking hold again in Democrat led cities. Voters in progressive San Francisco earlier this month approved a proposal by Mayor London Breed to screen and mandate addiction treatments for people receiving welfare. Washington, D.C. revised the 1990s law allowing the police to designate drug free zones for up to 5 days and stop drug trafficking and loitering. And states including California have passed or are considering laws increasing penalties for fentanyl dealers. If, quote, people feel like public order and public safety are prioritized around them, you will lose, are deteriorating around them, you will lose the citizenry and you will lose the politicians. Brandon Del Pozo, an adjunct professor teaching international drug policy at Georgetown University. Nationwide now, decriminalization is going to be off the table for a while. So, this is fascinating to me. This is interesting, and I think that Democrats should take note. Unlike Republicans, Democrats, progressives, are willing to make changes where changes are needed. I think that there are a lot of areas where there is overreach with respect to Democrats and policies to try and make good on government solving problems, right? We want to believe that you can solve problems through compassion, right? Conservatives, Republicans believe that sticks are the only way you can get people to be compliant. Throwing them in jail. Well, it costs to house people, to throw people in jail. So you run into the problem where how is the government gonna pay for this? Well, what ends up happening is they then go to private companies to try and get them to foot the cost. Well, where are they going to get the cost from? It becomes a vicious cycle. So part of what's going on here is, I believe, three things. You have a racial aspect to this, where Portland, Oregon is like not really, it's not a very diverse state. You've got a lot of people, particularly in the suburbs, and this is happening in all over the country, that are now dealing with this issue. So it's now not just racially focused as it had been. You've also got the financial part of this, right? You're housing all of these people. You can't afford to do it. It becomes cost prohibitive. And then you've got this other aspect of it that is about the rights of individuals, the Constitution and our protection from onerous governments and government getting into the people's business, right? And again, this is another area where conservatives are supposed to be for limiting government, right? Small government. But when it comes to these kinds of issues, they're for big government. They're big government Republicans when it comes to these kinds of issues like drugs. I think one of the things that Democrats are looking, and governments do, not just Democrats, but you go across the world, you see how other people are handling, how other countries are handling this problem. Here in Portland, apparently they must have looked at the model in Oregon. I think they actually had in this story, and again, the link to the full story will be in Mastodon. But I think that they actually spoke to someone who had created the drug policy or had studied the drug policy in Portugal and tried to replicate it here. Went too far too fast. That happens. But they didn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. They decide to do is say, where did we go wrong? Let's pull back. Let's make some adjustments where we can. And then as you start seeing success, as you start seeing people getting off drugs, as you start seeing people turning their lives around, then go back to a more liberal, quote unquote, liberal view on how to handle drugs. So I think that's the right move. I think that it is the big example, the big story that shows the huge difference between Democrats and Republicans. I think, again, it's another example of how it is and why it is, in my opinion, Democrats get things right. And, they go through growing pains. Listen, California is going through a hard time right now. drug, fentanyl, and all this kind of stuff is going on. But at least they're trying to fix the problem. They're trying to deal with the issue. And they are, again, not lying to the people like in red states. They're not making stuff up to make like this problem doesn't exist or that it is it's the end of the world. They are willing to make changes and willing to step back when they need to. And then once they've fixed the problem, looked at the problem, did analysis, fixed the problem, and then go back to, once they've seen the changes that they want, go back to making the situation better for everyone. Thank you for joining me on today's show. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Again, you can find out more information on today's show at our Mastodon. You can also watch previous episodes of this show both on YouTube and stream.vtip.me. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next one.